The suicide note lay folded on the desk like a small, poisonous secret, its edges trembling under the faint breath of the ceiling fan. Ink had bled into the paper where her hand had lingered too long, her script uneven, letters heavy, as if she had carved them out of her own skin. Outside the clinic window, the city of Kigali carried on with its patient rhythm. Boda-bodas buzzing like restless bees, street vendors calling out mango prices, children chasing one another barefoot across dusty pavements. Life pulsed out there. Yet in this room, she felt like a ghost rehearsing her own absence. The therapy room was painted in pale cream, the kind of color meant to calm. But the woman sitting in the leather chair, her back stiff, her chest aching under the weight she had hated for decades, could not be calmed. She was 35, but carried herself like someone much older. Her breasts were the first thing people noticed, always. To strangers, they were something to comment on, to laugh at, to ogle without shame. To her, they were prisons, bags of shame tied to her body, dragging her soul down into places she no longer wanted to live. Every mirror had been an enemy. Every shirt a battlefield. Men stared, women whispered, relatives made jokes that burned deeper than insults. Even her mother once told her she would never find a husband because men will only see those things, not you. Those words had calcified inside her, turning her reflection into a monster. Now she was in Kigali's private clinic, days away from the surgery she had begged for, saved for, prayed for. Breast reduction, a chance to feel normal, a chance to breathe, a chance to walk down the street without feeling like an exposed wound. Yet even this hope carried with it despair. She had written the note last night, her pen trembling as she whispered to herself that if the surgery did not change her, if she still woke up to the same weight in her chest, she would end it. A handful of pills in a water glass, quick, quiet, forgotten. The therapist sitting opposite her, a tall man with kind, quiet eyes, was speaking, but his words floated in and out of her hearing like radio static. He was telling her about healing, about patience, about self-acceptance, but she had lived inside this cage too long. His voice was like rain on a locked window, soft, powerless, unable to reach her. She nodded occasionally, not to agree but to make him stop pressing. Her body shifted on the chair, uncomfortable, restless. She clutched her stomach with both hands as if holding herself together. She could feel the note burning inside her handbag. No one in this room knew that she had already planned the end. No one knew that tomorrow night, after surgery, if hope betrayed her, she would swallow herself into silence. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and lemon soap. The air conditioner hummed softly, a sound that made her feel small, like a child in a foreign place. She watched the clock tick on the wall, its second hand sweeping away fragments of her willpower. The therapist asked her how she felt about tomorrow, but what could she say? That she felt like a condemned prisoner counting down to execution? That she feared the scalpel not because of pain, but because she wasn't sure if the new body would still feel unbearable? That sometimes she wondered if God had made her as a cruel joke? She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. Memories swarmed in like hornets. The boy at school who called her elephant chest. The church elder who looked her up and down and said, "You must cover yourself. You tempt men." The shopkeeper who once gave her extra tomatoes if she let him stare a little longer. Shame, shame, shame. It was tattooed into her bones. When she opened her eyes again, she caught her own reflection in the glass cabinet of medical files across the room. A faint, blurred version of herself, shoulders hunched, eyes heavy, body wrapped in loose clothing that failed to hide what she wanted erased. She looked like someone already halfway gone. The therapist handed her a notebook, suggesting she write down her fears before the operation. She almost laughed. If he knew what she had written last night, he would snatch the pen away. But she smiled politely, scribbled nonsense lines, and handed it back. He thought she was healing. In truth, she was rehearsing her death. That evening, when the therapy session ended, she walked through the busy streets of Kigali, the city alive with twilight traffic. The sky glowed orange, the hills surrounding the city wrapped in a soft mist. Vendors roasted maize on the roadside, the smoke curling into the air, mingling with the scent of frying chapati. People laughed, children clung to their mothers' skirts, young couples whispered promises on the corners. All this life, vivid and stubborn, only deepened her loneliness. She felt like a cracked statue moving among dancers. At home, she folded her clothes neatly, set her alarm for the early appointment, and placed the suicide note under her pillow. She touched it with the tips of her fingers as one might touch a loaded gun. Her room was silent except for the crickets outside. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling under the weight she despised. She thought of her body as a battlefield, tomorrow as the last attempt to win. And if the war could not be won, then she would end it herself. The moonlight slid across her room, silver and cold. She pressed her palms against her breasts, the very flesh that had cursed her since girlhood. She whispered into the night that tomorrow would decide everything, either freedom or final silence. And with that vow, she closed her eyes, waiting for dawn like a prisoner waits for the warden's footsteps. The morning came too quickly, crawling into her room with a pale, hesitant light. She had barely slept. Dreams had pressed on her like heavy stones. Visions of scissors cutting ribbons that grew back. Visions of strangers staring at her chest. Visions of water swallowing her whole. When the alarm rang at 5, her body felt weak, as though she had already lived through the surgery 1,000 times in her sleep. She rose quietly, as if afraid of waking the walls. She folded her bedsheet with careful hands, placed the pillow neatly on top, and touched the folded suicide note one last time. The paper was soft now, wrinkled from her restless fingers. She slipped it back into her handbag. The bag felt heavier than usual, as though it carried not only the note but the weight of every year of shame. The taxi ride to the clinic was a blur of city life. Kigali was waking up. Schoolchildren in neat uniforms walked in small groups. Women balanced baskets of bananas on their heads, and the hills shone green under the first breath of sunlight. She sat in the back seat, pressing her forehead against the glass. The driver hummed to a radio song, his voice cheerful, unaware that the woman in his back seat was carrying both death and hope in the same heartbeat. At the clinic, the reception smelled of disinfectant and fresh flowers. Someone had placed a vase of lilies on the counter. The petals glowed white, pure and fragile, like something untouched by pain. She could not look at them for long. She checked in with the nurse, signed her name shakily, and was guided into a private room. The walls were clean, almost too clean, like they were trying to erase every trace of human suffering. She changed into the hospital gown, the fabric thin against her skin. She sat on the bed and wrapped her arms around herself. The nurse smiled at her kindly, attaching the wristband, checking her pulse. The nurse's hands were gentle, but her chest felt like it was tightening, as if ropes were being pulled tighter and tighter inside her ribs. Time slowed. The minutes stretched like hours. She thought of her childhood, of the first time she realized her body was different. She was only 12 when a teacher scolded her for distracting the boys with her chest. She remembered shrinking into her seat, wishing her body would melt away. From that moment, every gaze felt like an attack. Every whisper felt like a curse. She had never been free since. Now, lying on the hospital bed, she wondered if tomorrow she would wake up lighter, or if she would wake up to the same prison, only scarred. She whispered to herself, "Please let this be the end of it." The anesthesiologist entered, calm and professional. He explained the process, his voice steady, almost musical. But she heard very little. She was focused on the ceiling, on the bright surgical lights above, on the thought that soon she would be gone, either into a sleep that would change her body or into the permanent sleep she had planned. Her heart raced. The nurse squeezed her hand gently, as if sensing the storm inside. Then the medicine slid into her veins, cool and heavy. The ceiling blurred. Her breath grew slower. The last thought before she slipped under was not about her body, not about the note, not even about the pain. It was about her mother's voice saying, "Men will only see those things." The words echoed as she sank into blackness. When she opened her eyes, she was not dead. She was wrapped in warmth, the smell of antiseptic strong, the beeping of machines steady like a heartbeat beside her. For a moment, she thought she had woken in some in-between world, neither alive nor gone. Then she saw the nurse's face, soft with relief, and realized she was still here. The surgery was over. Her chest felt tight, bandaged, strange, foreign. She wanted to reach for it but could not. Her arms felt heavy, her body weak. But beneath the weakness was a quiet hum of something she had not felt in years. Possibility. The nurse brought water, her voice gentle, like she was speaking to a child. "It went well," she said softly. "You are safe." Safe. The word felt almost dangerous, as though she did not deserve it. Hours passed in fragments of sleep. She drifted in and out, caught between dreams and reality. At one point, she woke to find a tray of food near her bed. Broth, bread, juice. She barely touched it. Hunger was drowned out by something else. Fear. Fear of looking at herself. Fear of tomorrow. Fear that the old shame would crawl back into her skin. It was late evening when the nurse returned, carrying a small tablet. "I want to show you something," she said gently. She pulled a chair close to the bed and opened the screen. The woman's heart tightened. She feared bad news, but instead she saw a picture. It was her. A photo from before the surgery, taken at the clinic when she first signed the forms. She wore a loose dress, her face guarded, her eyes tired. She almost turned away ashamed. But then the nurse scrolled down. And there it was. Comments, thousands of them. Women from Kigali, from Nairobi, from Lagos, from as far as Johannesburg. Messages in English, in French, in Kinyarwanda. Words that poured out like a river. "You are brave. You are not alone. You gave me courage to talk about my own body. My daughter saw your photo and said she finally feels normal." The nurse explained quietly that somehow the clinic's pre-surgery awareness post had gone viral. Her story, the story she thought was hidden, had reached thousands. Women had shared their own scars, their own shame, their own prayers for healing. She had become a mirror in which others saw themselves. She blinked at the screen, confused. How could this be? She had been ready to vanish, and yet here were strangers clinging to her presence. Tears rose before she could stop them. She turned her face into the pillow, trembling. She had wanted to disappear quietly. Instead, her pain had spilled into the world and returned as love. The nurse placed the tablet gently on the table beside her and whispered, "Sometimes your suffering lights the way for others." Then she left, giving space for the weight of it to settle. Alone again, the woman lay in the dim light of the recovery room. The walls seemed less cold now, the shadows less cruel. She thought of the note hidden in her handbag, the note that had planned her absence. And she thought of the thousands of women whose words begged her not to leave. Her chest ached under the bandages, but for the first time, the pain felt alive, like proof she was still here. Her body was wounded, yes, but perhaps no longer cursed. The thought frightened her, warmed her, confused her. She closed her eyes, and this time when sleep came, it was not a rehearsal for death, but the fragile beginning of a new chapter. The next morning in the clinic, the world looked brighter than it should have. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting thin golden lines across the white floor tiles. Outside, Kigali's hills rose like soft green shoulders under the clear sky. Inside, the room smelled faintly of medicine and new beginnings. She woke slowly, her body sore but steady, her chest wrapped tight in layers of bandages. The pain was sharp, but it was the kind of pain that promised healing instead of humiliation. For a long time she lay still, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Each breath felt like proof that she had not followed the plan from the note. She was here, alive, changed. The nurse entered with a careful smile and asked how she felt. She answered with a small nod, too heavy to find words. The nurse placed a tray of porridge and tea beside her bed, then touched the tablet on the table. "More messages came," she said softly. "You may want to see them." At first, she hesitated. She feared the voices of strangers. For years, every comment about her body had been a wound, but now curiosity pulled at her, like a hand reaching through the dark. She lifted the tablet with trembling fingers. The screen glowed, full of faces and words. Hundreds of women, thousands, each message a fragment of hope. Some were short, "Thank you." Others were long confessions of pain carried for years. A young girl from Nigeria wrote, "I hid my body for so long, but when I saw you, I told my mother I want to get help too." A mother from Kenya shared, "My daughter cried when she saw your picture. She said, 'Now I know I'm not alone.'" Another woman from Rwanda wrote in Kinyarwanda, "Ubanza imana yagukoresheje kugira nango tubone ko tutari turi twenyine." Maybe God used you so we could see we are not alone. She scrolled, and the tears came. Slow at first, then heavy, shaking her chest under the bandages. She pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to quiet the sobs, but they poured out anyway. For years, she had been crushed by silence, thinking she was the only one cursed with this shame. Now here was proof she was not alone. Her pain had become a bridge between her and strangers across continents. The tablet slipped onto the blanket as her tears blurred the screen. She closed her eyes, her face wet, her throat burning with emotion. The suicide note in her handbag felt like a lie now, an ugly shadow compared to the light pouring in from these women. Later, when the doctor came to check her wounds, he spoke of healing time, of careful rest, of avoiding heavy lifting. She nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of the faces of those women, their eyes, their words, their lives. Somehow her story had reached them, lifted them, touched them. The idea was terrifying and beautiful all at once. That evening, when she was strong enough to sit up in bed, the nurse returned and asked if she wanted to record a short video. At first, panic rushed through her veins. To show her face? To speak her truth? For years she had hidden. She shook her head violently, but the nurse said gently, "They are waiting. Not for perfection, just for your voice." She sat in silence for a long time. The walls of the clinic seemed to close in, as if demanding an answer. Then, with slow resolve, she nodded. The nurse held up the tablet, adjusted the camera, and said, "Just speak as if you are talking to one woman. One who needs you." Her lips trembled. Her chest ached. She looked into the camera lens, and for the first time in years, she did not see an enemy staring back. She saw a mirror, a chance. Her words came softly at first, broken by pauses, but they grew stronger as she spoke. She said she had hated her body for so long. She said she had carried shame like a heavy stone. She admitted she had thought of leaving this world because of it. Her throat closed as she confessed that last night she had written goodbye. Then she lifted her eyes and whispered, "But today, because of you, I choose life." Her voice cracked. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept speaking. She told them that pain can become a doorway, that sometimes the wound you carry can open light for someone else. She said she did not feel like a hero, only like a broken woman trying to heal. But she promised them that if they stayed, she would too. When the nurse stopped the recording, silence filled the room. She felt lighter, as if something had been pulled out of her chest that was heavier than flesh. The video was posted by evening. Within hours, messages multiplied. The comments were not just from women now. Men wrote about sisters, daughters, wives they had never understood before. A teacher wrote about changing how he spoke to his students. A father confessed he would never again shame his child's body. It was as if her truth had cracked open something larger than herself. As night fell, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The city outside buzzed softly with its night sounds, the hum of motorbikes, the bark of a distant dog, the call of a night guard. She thought of the women writing from faraway towns, from villages, from busy cities she had never seen. She thought of the note still folded in her bag, the note that no longer matched the woman she was becoming. With shaking hands, she reached for it. The paper was thin, fragile, almost weightless compared to how heavy it had once felt. She unfolded it slowly and read the words, "If this surgery fails, I will end it. I cannot live in this body anymore. Her eyes blurred as she held the paper close. Then she tore it, one careful strip at a time, until it was nothing but shreds lying on the floor like fallen leaves. The act was quiet, but inside her it roared. For the first time, she had chosen herself. Not for a man, not for society, not for beauty standards. For herself, and for the women who had seen her and said, "We need you." That night, she slept deeply, her body weak, but her spirit fierce. Her dreams were not of drowning or shame. They were of hills covered in green, of women holding hands, of 1,000 voices rising together. For the first time in years, she woke without fear. The morning after she tore the suicide note, Kigali woke under a sky as blue as forgiveness. The hills glistened after a night of rain, the red soil damp, the air fresh with the smell of wet grass. From her hospital bed, she could see the light spilling in, soft and golden, painting the walls as if reminding her that even the coldest places could be warmed. She rose slowly, her body stiff from the surgery. Each movement tugged at the bandages on her chest, sending sparks of pain through her ribs. Yet the pain no longer felt like punishment. It felt like proof. Proof that something inside her had changed. Proof that she had survived. The nurse entered with a smile and helped her sit up. "You look stronger today," she said, adjusting the pillow behind her. The words settled deep into the woman's bones. Stronger. Not weak, not cursed, not broken. Stronger. Breakfast was placed before her. Porridge, fruit slices, tea. She ate slowly, every spoonful reminding her body of its duty to stay alive. As she chewed, she thought of the countless comments she had read the night before. Words of strangers who had poured their stories into her lap, like pieces of broken glass. They were sharp, yes, but also shining. She realized now that she had been carrying her own broken glass for years, bleeding in silence. But shared pain was different. Shared pain could heal. Later in the day, when she was strong enough to walk, the nurse guided her down the corridor. Her feet touched the cold tiles, her steps small but steady. Other patients passed by, some with crutches, some in wheelchairs, some with bandaged arms. For the first time, she looked at them not with pity, but with kinship. Everyone here carried scars, visible or hidden. Everyone here was fighting to stay. At the end of the corridor was a large mirror fixed to the wall. The nurse asked her if she wanted to look. She froze. For years, mirrors had been her enemy. They had reflected shame, disgust, the heavy reminder of a body she could not accept. Her chest tightened, but then she remembered the torn suicide note, the words of women who saw her as light, not curse. She nodded. She stepped closer. Her reflection stared back, pale and tired, but different. The bandages covered her chest, pressing it flat, reshaping her outline. For the first time, she did not flinch. Her eyes lingered. She did not see too much. She saw survival. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out scarred but breathing. Tears rose, but they were gentle tears, like rain that nourishes instead of destroys. The nurse placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is the beginning," she whispered. That evening, her phone, finally returned to her after surgery, buzzed with notifications. The video she had recorded had gone beyond what anyone expected. News outlets had picked it up. Journalists were calling her the woman who gave courage to thousands. Schools were sharing her words with young girls. Organizations wanted to speak with her. The sound of her own voice, once hated, now traveled across screens and hearts. She sat on the bed, phone in hand, stunned. For years, she had believed her story was worthless. Now that same story had become medicine for others. She realized something powerful. The parts of herself she had wanted to erase were the very parts giving others permission to live. Over the next days, she healed slowly. Each morning, she walked a little farther down the corridor. Each evening, she read more messages from strangers. Some were desperate cries for help. Others were songs of gratitude. One young girl wrote, "I was going to harm myself, but when I saw you, I stopped. I want to live." That message stayed with her like a prayer whispered in her ear. By the end of the week, the doctor told her she was strong enough to go home. The thought of leaving the clinic scared her. The outside world was full of eyes, full of voices. But then she remembered. Those eyes and voices were not all cruel. Some were waiting for her. Some were hoping because of her. Her brother came to take her home. When he saw her, thinner and weaker but standing tall, he hugged her tightly. She had never told him about the suicide note. She kept that secret, not out of shame, but because the note no longer defined her. What defined her now was survival. The ride home was quiet. Kigali's streets rolled by, markets busy with women selling avocados, boda-bodas weaving through traffic, children in uniforms laughing as they walked home from school. She watched it all through the window, her chest aching but her spirit calm. For the first time, she did not feel like a ghost moving among the living. She felt like part of the rhythm. At home, she unpacked slowly. Clothes into drawers, shoes lined neatly, her handbag placed on the table. She reached inside and pulled out the shreds of the suicide note she had torn in the hospital. The pieces were still there, small and jagged. She gathered them carefully into her hands and carried them outside. The evening sun burned low, painting the sky with fire and gold. She stood in her small yard, the hills of Kigali rising gently in the distance, and opened her palms. The shreds of paper fluttered into the breeze, scattering across the soil like confetti. She watched them drift away, pieces of a past that no longer chained her. Her heart was still heavy at times. Healing was not magic. Shame did not vanish overnight, but she knew now that she was not alone, and that her story had power. Sometimes the very thing that almost killed you becomes the thing that saves someone else. She sat on the step outside her door, the sun warming her face. She thought of the young girl who wrote that she had chosen life after seeing her. She thought of the women who said they finally felt normal. She thought of herself, a woman who had once been ready to leave, now choosing to stay. In that moment, she whispered softly into the air, as if speaking to all of them at once. We are still here. And that is enough. The sun dipped lower, the crickets began their evening song, and the world felt both vast and tender. She breathed deeply, her chest rising with pain and promise. She had been broken, yes. But now, piece by piece, she was whole again, and though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one truth. Sometimes your pain is someone else's lifeline. And in saving them, you find yourself saved too.